Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. We'll get started here in a few seconds. We'll just wait for a few more participants to log in. Looks like we have everyone that signed up joined, so we will begin. I'll go through the meeting format. So tonight we'll have several speakers presenting in a presentation format, asking. You can ask questions via the Q&A feature. And within Zoom, you should see the Q&A. I've kind of highlighted that over here on the right-hand side with the blue arrow. You can continue typing in questions throughout the presentation, and then we'll have pauses during breaks within the presentation after each of the speakers for you to answer for Kia, who's going to be our question quarterback, to ask the questions, and then she'll direct those questions to the panelists, and then you'll have a response to your question. If there are questions that we can't answer tonight, we will research those and then be able to get that information back to you out on the website. This presentation and the exhibits will be located out on the northsplit.com/landscape website. And then we're asking for comments on the aesthetics and landscape plans be sent to info@northsplit.com, and the deadline for those comments to be come back December 10th, here shortly in a couple weeks. For the agenda tonight, we'll do welcome and introductions. We'll do a construction update. We'll give a status update on the noise barrier color and texture results. We'll go through the aesthetics and enhancement implementation plan, or the AEIP, the landscape and side slope final plan overview, and then we'll go through next steps, and then we'll adjourn. Well, welcome. My name is Erica Johnson. I'm with HNTB. I'm working on behalf of NDOT as the public liaison, information liaison. I'm
Mohammed Siddiqui, with Superior Construction, working as design build coordinator. I'll be providing construction update today.
I'm Ken Boyce with Ratio Architects. I work as a part of the Superior Design Build team, and I'll be addressing the AEIP and planting plans today.
And I'm Kia Gillette with HNTB. I'm the environmental lead for the project, and I'll be moderating questions this evening.
And this is our second virtual meeting that we've held. If you do have neighbors that you talk to after this meeting that would be interested in attending, we do have 2 additional meetings on November 23rd at noon and November 30th at noon. Please direct them to the website to be able to register for those meetings. And I will turn this over to Mohammed to give the construction update.
Thanks, Kia. So I'll begin with a quick construction overview of the project. As you all are aware, this project began summer of last year, summer 2020, and we began construction after finalizing the design right around this time last year in November. And once this project is completed, we'll be done with complete reconstruction of over 40 bridges in the footprint of this job, and a total reconstruction of the North Split interchange. Some of the advantages of this project is it'll reduce some of the biggest safety problems. There were some hot spots of crash areas where there was high frequency crashes and whatnot. Those will be taken care of. It'll improve operational deficiencies, and the bottlenecks leading to congestion will be eliminated. Also, biggest part of this project is a significant aesthetic and design improvements package, which Ken will be talking about later in the presentation today. And also this project will replace all the lighting and signage to meet the most standard requirements. With that, we'll move on to the next slide, which will provide a quick overview of what we have done to date and what is to be seen in the future. The first biggest milestone that we've achieved is the reopening of the Michigan Collector Distributed Exit Ramp. As you can see on the upper right-hand corner, that picture is the new pavement with all the roadway features, including guardrail and sidewalk and everything else. This was open to public and is currently still open to traveling public beginning October of, beginning last month. Also, as part of this ramp, we completed the St. Clair Street Bridge, which you can see on the lower right-hand corner. That is not the final product because there's still painting and all the aesthetic features that go along with it, but it is open to traveling public. Some of the important highlights of maintenance of traffic plan is, as we're going through this construction, there is still some truck restrictions leading into downtown. The eastbound Ohio Street leading to Pine Street is currently closed, but it is anticipated to be open right after Thanksgiving. Construction will continue through the winter months. One of the commitments to the project was to keep Ohio collector distributor ramp or Michigan collector distributor ramp, one of the two, open at all times. So as we're now done with Michigan, Ohio CD is under construction and it will be opened back up to traffic as soon as the construction is completed. Moving on to the next slide, we'll quickly talk about a little bit of details about all the side streets that are going to get new bridges. As you can see on your screen, Alabama, Central College, Commerce, St. Clair, Vermont, Michigan, 10th Street, Lewis Street, New York Street Market, and Washington Streets are all going to get new bridges over them. As you can see on the picture on the screen, that is one of the largest or longest bridges on the project. You can see those 8 piers erected. We'll be installing the beams here in a 3 weeks. And that bridge is the highlight of the project. It is almost 800 feet long and has over 10 spans. Also, one important highlight, in order to maximize our efficiency and minimize the impact of the traveling public, we are utilizing the open spaces between the roadways and trying to build as much offline construction as possible, including ramps and bridges and interchange grading, without causing any disruption to the traveling movements of the traffic. With that, Erica, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Now I'll go through an update on the noise barrier color and texture results. As part of the project, 2 noise barriers will be constructed. Next slide, please. On the what we call the east leg of the interchange, on the north side of I-70, we'll call it westbound. So it's wall 3W, and this is between Lewis Street and Commerce. And then next slide. And then the other wall is from Commerce to Valley, which is wall 3E. Postcards were sent out to the benefited residents in early June. And next slide. And they returned all of their postcard results. We received several of those. We've tallied those. And as a result of those tabulated postcards, the federal standard color 364692, which is a mouthful, which is gray, was selected, and pattern 1, Ashlar Stone, which is up here on your upper right, was selected. The anticipated construction for these 2 noise barriers is to begin in summer 2022 and be completed by substantial completion in November of 2022. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Kia to see if we have any questions.
We're going to pause for just a moment to see if we have any questions that come in on the Q&A feature. If you do have questions, if you move your cursor down to the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A button. So feel free to type those in. And at this point, I'm not seeing any questions, so we will move forward with the presentation. There will be additional opportunities later for questions.
So this is Ken Boyce, and I'm going to speak a little bit today about the Aesthetic and Enhancement Implementation Plan, or AEIP. Give you a bit of an overview. Next slide, please. The AEIP shows how the aesthetic design guidelines were developed during the environmental planning process are to be implemented in the final design. So the AEIP further develops the aesthetic elements of the project based upon the final infrastructure design, the heights, widths, lengths of constructed elements, and constructability issues, determining the best construction methods, given the materials and the final infrastructure design. The AEIP was completed by the design build team, and it includes underpass treatments, lighting, retaining wall and bridge treatments, and landscaping. Next slide, please. Like the design guidelines, the AEIP is broken into two general areas: infrastructure elements, like hardscape, walls, piers, lighting, underpasses, and other construction items directly associated with bridges in the roadway, and landscaping elements or plantings within the project area at side slopes, interchange, and the west, east, and south legs of the interchange. Construction on some of the infrastructure elements has begun. It's underway, as Mohammed spoke to earlier, and other infrastructure elements and landscaping will be included in future construction activities over the next year. Next slide, please. So I'm going to speak a bit to the AEIP infrastructure elements at this point. Next slide, please. So the underpass construction, bridge openings, this construction has begun on some of the underpasses. Most of the work will occur for the enhancements will occur once the bridge construction is complete. So you can see an image of the St. Clair Street bridge that is constructed. A portion of the enhancements are in place, but not all. Next slide, please. So the aesthetic design guidelines developed a uniform set of underpass treatments that were given to the teams that submitted, design build teams that submitted proposals. And they included elements like are depicted here in this graphic. There's a series of bridge underpasses that get special treatments, like monuments at all four corners, street names to be included on the underpasses, paint colors, and special architectural features. Next slide, please. So the AEIP then took those guidelines and developed those elements and components that are specific to the design proposed by the Superior Design Build team. And we applied those features to the specifics of the various bridge overpasses. So here you can see the 10th Street Bridge and a representation of the specifics of what will be built. The monuments at the four corners. The 10th Street Bridge is a fairly wide opening, as you can see from this graphic. But in general, you can see that the AEIP lays out a design for the 10th Street Bridge that is very similar to the character of the design guidelines, just simply an extension of that. Next slide, please. So we'll show you a series of the bridges. Here are several of them to give you a sense of how the design guidelines play out with various bridges. The Central Avenue Bridge, shorter span bridge, but it's also a major gateway bridge and has the monuments in all four corners, very similar sort of character to the other bridges we've shown you. Next slide, please. Representation of the College Avenue Bridge. This is probably the shortest span of the bridges we'll show you. But again, a very similar set of architectural features. Next slide, please. So this is the Washington Street Bridge, probably the longest span of the ones we'll show you here today. And unique to the Washington Street Bridge is a longitudinal slope across the bridge, so you can get a feel for how that plays out with the design guideline features. Next slide, please. So the aesthetic design guidelines identified special paving treatments for walks through the underpasses. The intent is to make the underpass experience for the pedestrians as nice as possible. Some of these underpasses get to be kind of long, and we just want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence here to make it a pleasant experience as the pedestrians move through those spaces. Next slide, please. So the AEIP took those guidelines for the specialty paving and features on the underpasses and refined those. And we've finalized the paver material selections and patterns based upon the various constructability issues. Next slide, please. So the design guidelines identified special lighting treatments for walks through the underpasses and various piers and monuments and so forth associated with the improvements. You can see some images here depicting some of the uplighting features at the monuments, for instance, as well as some of the piers, and then downlighting within the underpass itself so that the pedestrians are comfortable. It's a well-lit space, and it makes for a more comfortable pedestrian experience at night. Next slide, please. So the final downlighting and uplighting fixtures have been identified within the AEIP. So we've made selections of specific fixtures from a list of possible options or character described within the design guidelines. And you can see a representation of those fixtures here on this slide. So this Bega LED compact flood, for instance, is an actual fixture that has been selected by the design build team for use. Next slide, please. The general pier aesthetics were also defined within the aesthetic design guidelines, and these drawings were provided to the design build team to use as a point of beginning for the design of the piers. Next slide, please. And the AEIP then took those guidelines and refined and finalized the design of the piers relative to the specific design needs for the structural requirements for the piers. And you can see the character is very similar. The reveals that were proposed within the design guidelines on the long face of the piers have been kept. The recess on the ends of the piers have been kept. Some minor refinements to some of the dimensions of the reveals for constructability reasons, to making sure we had good quality concrete pours and good quality finish results with the construction. Next slide, please. So the Superior Design team during the early phases of construction mocked up the face of the piers, full-scale mock-up for review by a number of people to verify the shape and dimension of the reveals and the piers themselves, test and verify finishes and colors, and test and verify texture applications. Next slide, please. This is also a full-scale mock-up of the caps of the piers. So again, very similar issues being reviewed relative to the quality of the finishes, textures, colors, so forth. So very nice step in the process that was used for quality control. Next slide, please. And this is an image of one of the built piers that Mohammed spoke to earlier that has been built for a while, but you can see the character of the full pier. It's awaiting the beams to be installed and so forth, but the reveals themselves are appropriately scaled and relative to the size of the pier, and offer some relief, shadow relief and so forth, and breaks up the mass of concrete. Next slide, please. Full-scale mock-ups were also prepared for the MSE wall panels. Again, a nice step in the process for quality control purposes, reviewing colors and textures, finishes, and so forth. Just a general pause to make sure we were on the right track. Next slide, please. This is a closer look at the St. Clair Street Bridge, the MSE wall that's been built for the abutment of the bridge. You can see those of you that are local and familiar with the project site probably have seen this, and it's a good representation of what is to come on many other of the bridges. Next slide, please.
We're going to pause again to see if we have any questions, and we did have one question. And that question was, will Schofield be affected? And if that's referring to Schofield Avenue, there will be no impacts to Schofield Avenue as part of the North Split project. If by chance that was referring to the soccer fields north of the North Split interchange in the park, there will be no impacts to the soccer fields either. So in either case, the answer is no, they will not be affected. And at this point, I'm not seeing any additional questions, so we will keep moving. Ken, I'm going to turn it back to you to talk about the landscaping, and there will be some additional opportunities for questions later as well.
Thank you, Kia. So we'll talk a little bit about the plant material and planting plans that are planned for the corridor. It's a unique solution here that was put forth within the design guidelines, essentially establishing an urban forest. We're following through on that agenda, and I think we have some exciting things here to present. The image you're looking at right now on the right side lists the various landscape typologies that were put forth within the design guidelines. I'll just briefly touch upon them. You'll see these typologies applied throughout the images we're about to show you for more detailed representation of what's about to be built. But the purple type 1 typology is a do not disturb area where there was deemed valuable existing plant material that needed to be saved. So those areas have been set aside and will not be disturbed. The second one, the yellowish colored type 2 turf grass buffer is an area where we need to have clear sight lines adjacent to travel lanes and at curves and so forth for safe motorist activity within the interstate system. The type 3 typologies are side slope plantings that will consist of a ground plane of native grasses and wildflowers, and in many cases shade trees, ornamental trees, and then shrubs. The type 4 is a planting typology that is immediately adjacent to the sound walls and intended to soften the appearance of the sound walls and make them less noticeable from the residential side of the sound wall. And then type 5 are plantings that are specific to the interchange area, very similar to the type 3, but some subtle differences between the two. And then type 6 is a planting typology that's specific to the detention basins, or the detention basin that's north of the interchange, and plantings that are specifically selected for their ability to survive temporary inundation of water by water. So next slide, please. So this is a representation, just some images of what when we say native grass and wildflowers or forbs, this is the kind of character that we're tracking towards meadow-like native plant materials. Next slide, please. So this is an image that is typical of the design guidelines that establishes the various typologies and where those typologies will exist within the various portions of the project. So next slide, please. So the image here in front of you is a portion of the west leg planting plan that's been prepared. The dark green circles, larger dark green circles on the bottom of that plan image are intended to be representing shade trees, and the smaller red circles are intended to be ornamental trees. So you can see lots of trees being planted. And then the sort of lime green color that's hatched is the type 3 typology. That's the area of the trees and the untreed areas are both going to get planted with the native grass and wildflowers. So it'll be a very similar looking character throughout those two zones on the ground plane. And then the tan are do not disturb areas. So those are areas where there's some existing vegetation that will not be disturbed. The yellowish color, typology 2, is the turf grass. So those are areas adjacent to the local street there where we're intending to have a mowable condition in this particular case. Next slide, please. So this is a slide that gives you a little better feel for the three-dimensional aspects of the corridor. It's very similar to what many of you probably saw during the preparation of the design guidelines, and they've been refined to reflect the design build team's intent relative to implementation of the design guidelines and AEIP. So you can see the location of the section in the plan here, and it's adjacent to the Old North Side and St. Joseph historic districts. So I'll start on the right side with this section, and there's this is would be the south side of the section. So we're looking eastbound here, and so on the right side we see the right-of-way line, and then we have a tree preservation or a do not disturb area for about 19 feet from the right-of-way line in, and then we transition to a type 3B type planting typology, which is native grasses and wildflowers. So we switch over to the north side of the section. We have again a tree a do not disturb area for about 15 to 16 feet off the right-of-way line, and so that area will be set aside, not disturbed. And then between the do not disturb area and the retaining wall of the interstate will be again a type 3B typology, which is native grasses and forbs. Next slide, please. So this is a second place within the west leg that we've chosen to illustrate. The plan on the right side of the image again shows the dark green circles being the canopy trees, and then the smaller red circles are the ornamental trees, and the tan being the do not disturb areas where there's existing vegetation that will remain in place. So the lime green again is the type 3 planting typology, where there's native grasses and wildflowers. And then the type 5 typology in the sort of rust color is a native plant wildflower, very similar to the type 3 native grass and wildflower planting, but it's a zone that is restricted. Trees are restricted from that for safety purposes. So it's a distinction within the plans, but the lime green and the rust colored plantings are very similar. Next slide, please. So this is again, we have a section to help you understand three-dimensionally what's going on with that particular area. And this is a section that's cut adjacent to the Chatham Arch Historic District. You can see the location of that section with this graphic section representation. So starting on the right side again, we have a tree preserve or a do not disturb zone that's adjacent to the right-of-way line. Then we go into a couple of typology 3 plantings, the first of which will include canopy trees and ornamental trees, shrubs, wildflowers, native grass, and then we'll have just an area of native grass and wildflowers adjacent to the interstate. Next slide, please. And then we're moving into the interchange area. It's a very large area, and we'll go through how we have chosen to implement the design guidelines. This is a representation that was a part of the design guideline process. Next slide, please. Here we have a graphic on the left side that is a plan graphic that shows the placement of the canopy trees and the ornamental trees within the area on the north side of the interchange. You can see the detention basin location that is planned, and that area will be planted with a selection of ground cover plant material, native grasses, wildflowers, but those particular plants that we've selected for that area will be able to withstand the temporary inundation of the stormwater. So as a rain event happens and it fills, it doesn't kill the plant material. The dark green is a type 5A plant landscape typology, native grasses, wildflowers. So this whole area of green, lime green, and green, dark green is and the rest is all planted with native grasses and wildflowers. The yellow color is a mowable lawn condition for maintenance purposes around the detention basin, and then immediately adjacent to the proposed trail facilities. And we also have a mobile lawn condition in places where we have drainage swales, where NDOT's going to need to get in and maintain the drainage swales. So for maintenance purposes, we're showing some mobile lawn within those areas too. Next slide, please. So another portion of the interchange, this particular image on the right is located in the southwestern portion of the interchange. And again, you're seeing very similar graphics here, so I won't repeat all the detail, but you're seeing the canopy and ornamental trees. The yellow areas are the mobile lawn areas where we have drainage swales that need to be maintained. The lime green and the dark green and the rust colors all native grasses and wildflowers. Next slide, please. A section through that general area in the southwest portion of the interchange. You can see the section location designated here. And I'll just start on the left side of this image. We have a typology 2 turf grass zone between the right of way and some type 5 typology plantings. There's a walk that is proposed for that area. And in the center of that section, we have lots of trees, ornamental and canopy trees being planted, and again, all planted underneath with native grasses and wildflowers. And on the right side, we have an area of a typology 2 turf grass. That's a drainage swale, and then more native grass and wildflowers, and then the travel lanes on the right side of the image. Next slide, please. So this is yet a third area of the interchange that we've illustrated for the planting plan, and that's in the southeast portion of the interchange. Very similar graphics to what I've talked through already, so you can get a sense for the tree placement and places where we have mobile lawn, and the medium green and the light green and the sort of rust colored areas are all native grass with wildflowers. Next slide, please. So we have a section for this area. Also, it's adjacent to the Monon Trail. You can see the designation of the location for the section. And starting on the right side of that section at the right-of-way line and coming in, the Monon Trail is represented, and it has a buffer of typology 2 turf grass, mobile condition. And then in the center, we go from native grass and wildflowers, intensively planted canopy trees and ornamental trees and shrubs. And then on the left side, we're back to native grasses and wildflowers, and then we adjacent to the travel lane itself. Next slide, please. So now we're looking at a portion of the East Lake design guideline. Again, gave us our framework for how we are to design and implement the planting plan. So next slide, please. an illustration that depicts the planting plan for this particular portion of the project. And you can see on the south side, it's pretty similar to the graphics we've talked about already on the other images. Lots of canopy trees and ornamental trees, and lots of native grass and wildflowers, an area of mowable lawn, in an area of a drainage swale. On the north side, we have a little bit of a different condition than we've spoken about so far, and that area includes a sound wall. So we now in this area have a typology that seeks a landscape typology that seeks to screen and buffer that sound wall a bit from the residential areas to the north, and then lots of canopy trees and ornamental trees, native grasses, and wildflowers. Next slide, please. So here's a section in that general area. Again, a plan that shows you the general location of that. This is in the vicinity of Windsor Park. And we're looking east with this section. I'll start on the south side here with the right-of-way line. We have, this is the area of the drainage swale where we have the type 2 turf grass mobile lawn area, and adjacent to that and between that area and the actual travel lanes, we have a type 3B plantings, which is native grasses and wildflowers. Moving over to the left side of the section, or the north side of the section, we have an area of typology 2 turf grass. Then we have an area of type 3A plantings, which is native grass, wildflowers, underground plant shrubs, planted underneath canopy trees and ornamental trees. And then the unique portion of this, we have the sound wall represented here by this tall vertical black line. So north of that sound wall on the residential side, we have a prescriptive type of planting that is intended to help visually buffer the sound wall. Some evergreen trees, evergreen shrubs, but otherwise it's similar to the other plantings where we have trees, canopy trees, ornamental trees, shrubs, and then evergreen trees and shrubs, native grasses and wildflowers. And between the sound wall and the actual travel lane, we have mobile lawn. Next slide, please. So now we're looking at a portion of the south leg, just south of the interchange, and then like all the others areas, we take our cue beginning point from the design guidelines. Next slide, please. And then we have a representation of an illustration that represents the intended planting plans for the area. You can see again the canopy and ornamental trees, mobile lawn areas of drainage swales, native grasses and wildflowers, and the lime green and the rust colored hatches. Next slide, please. So this is a section that's cut through that general area. You can see the designation of the section cut location. And this section is in the vicinity of the Lockerbie Square and Cottage Home historic districts. And very similar graphic to what we've seen already. Starting at the right side, we're looking northeast with this section. Starting on what would be the east side of the section, we have mobile lawn for about 10 feet, and then we have some type 3A plantings with trees, shrubs, native grasses and wildflowers. And then we go into a section of turf grass again, about 16 feet wide. And then we have an area of wildflowers and native grasses adjacent to the northbound travel lanes. And on the left side of the section, very similar condition, turf grass, trees, ornamental and shade, shrubs, wildflowers, native grasses, and then an area where we have the same ground plane treatment, but we restrict the tree plantings and shrub plantings for safety purposes. Next slide, please. This is another area of the south leg that we're looking at, just a little further south. Next slide, please. And here's an illustration of that area. You can see the Ohio Street off ramp in this particular location, and the ramp that passes underneath the interstate and transitions to Pine Street, to give you a sense of where we are. Very similar graphics. You can see the tree plantings, the mobile lawn, the native grass, wildflower areas. Next slide, please. And then a section here, like we've shown you with the other areas. This section is adjacent to the Holy Cross Westminster Historic District. And on the right side, would be looking north again, and on the right side of that section, at the right-of-way line, we have some turf grass, 10 feet of turf grass, and then about 36 feet of type 3A typology, which is ornamental and shade trees, shrubs, wildflowers, native grass, and then about 20 feet of native grass and wildflower plantings adjacent to the northbound travel lane. Next slide, please.
All right, we're going to pause for a second to answer some questions, and we do have some questions that have come in. So the first question is, so basically these bridges will mainly be downtown and not affecting neighborhood areas. Yes, the bridges are on I-65 and I-70 in the downtown area, and it's approximately on the west end, I-65 over Alabama Street, headed east to the North Split interchange, and then I-70 on the east end, headed west from about Commerce Avenue to the North Split interchange, and then from the North Split interchange south to Washington Street, where I-65 and I-70 are parallel. And they're bridges that are adjacent to some neighborhoods, but all of the work will be completed within the existing interstate right-of-way. Next question is the pathway shown to the north of the pond the newer loop section of the Monon? And that is correct. That is the Monon Loop, and that trail has been constructed and it is open to pedestrian and bicycle traffic. So if you've not walked on it yet, please feel free to check it out. I believe it actually opened in May of this year. Next question, how mature will the trees going in be? The specifications are for 2-inch diameter at breast height. So at approximately your chest level, the trees are going to be about 2 inches wide. The ornamental trees are about 8 feet tall. So the smaller trees are roughly 8 feet tall. So these are not tiny little seedlings that are going in. These are fairly decent sized trees, as well as ornamental trees. And I'll just check with Ken. Ken, do you have I realize it's going to differ depending on species, but how old that level of tree would be? How many years old?
Yeah, that's hard to say, but it's probably with a nursery grown stock, you know, they're growing them quickly. They're probably 4 or 5 years old.
So these are decent sized trees. These are not tiny little trees that are going to go in.
Yeah, the canopy trees are probably in the vicinity of 12 to 14 feet tall. So.
All right, any other questions for us today? Okay, I'm not seeing any. So Erica, I'm going to turn it back over to you to continue.
Thank you, Kia. Well, if you have some additional comments after you are looking at the information that's out on the website, please email those comments to us at info@northsplit.com, or go ahead and visit if you haven't had a chance to look at the plans and the presentation materials again, please visit northsplit.com/landscape. And if you don't have email, please send those hard copy comments to attention to myself, Erica Johnson, at 111 Monument Circle, Suite 1200, and I'll make sure that those are added into the comment tracking form for the Superior Construction team to address and review. Again, the comment period ends Friday, December 10th. And with that, the next steps, we'll have additional virtual public meetings November 23rd and November 30th. The comment period, again, December 10th, 2021. We'll have another virtual public update meeting in early 2022 on the final landscape and aesthetic plans. And then the roadway fully opens to motorists in late 2022. And then for anyone that has comments that are not related to aesthetics and landscape, I did want to remind everyone about NDOT's customer service and NDOT for You. So it's a comprehensive customer service program. So if you have something that you see or a pothole along the interstate within the interchange, please use ndotforyou.com or call 855 NDOT for You, or send an email to ndot@ndot.in.gov. Those do come to myself and a team of public information group for us to review and answer. And so it's not just going to a customer service group, it's also coming directly to the project team for us to review and provide a response to the public. Then if you haven't checked out the rest of the website, there's photo galleries, construction info, detour maps on upcoming local street closures, as well as a video gallery and a media room. And then if you haven't already, please follow us on social media, for Facebook at North Split, for Twitter at North Split, for Instagram at Indy North Split, or you can text 468-333-311 and receive project status update information. Thank you all for joining.
Hey, Erica, I'm going to interrupt you. Sorry about this, but we do have one more question, if it's okay if we go ahead and take that one.
That's perfect.
Question, and Ken, I'm going to direct this to you. The question is, will the trees be staked and or have protection at base from rodents?
We can get back to them on the specifics of what's going to be done with the staking and so forth, but the no rodent protection that I'm familiar with, and we'll have to get back to you on the staking.
Yeah, what we'll do is we'll take a look at some of we'll provide responses to all of the questions that we get, and we will post those to the website after all 4 of the meetings. So please be looking for that, and we will get back to you on that.
Well, thank you all for joining. Have a good evening.